Today we're going to make 3 totally different breads out of one batch of sourdough. To your bowl, add 1½ cups of warm water, 1 cup of sourdough starter, ½ cup of oil. Any kind of oil will do, whatever you like to use. Now I'm going to stir this together to get it incorporated. Next, you'll add 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of yeast. Yes, I do add a little yeast to my sourdough bread. You do not have to. The reason I add a little bit of yeast to my sourdough bread is because it helps with the rise time. I can make sourdough bread in about 4 to 6 hours using a little bit of yeast. Typically, in a loaf of bread that has 3 cups of flour, you will put about a tablespoon of yeast. This recipe will have around 6 cups of flour, so I'm only putting half the yeast you would typically use in a loaf of bread. You'll still have the typical sourdough flavor. The only thing it changes is you won't have the super long ferment. I'm going to start adding my flour 1 cup at a time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add a 2nd cup of flour. You don't have to get it totally mixed in, but incorporated most of the way before you add your next cup. This has been a very, very fun month for me, getting to see all the different recipes in November for Doughvember. It has been so much fun seeing all the unique recipes people are doing. You can see all of the people that are participating in this collab right here, and they are also linked down in the description below to see the playlist. If you haven't seen all of these videos, you need to go check those out and watch them because they have been very, very creative with their recipes. Special thanks to Lisa Sutton for getting this together at Sutton Days. We're going to go ahead and add our next cup of flour. I believe I'm on number 4. I've kind of lost count. I've been doing bread long enough. I know how the dough needs to look and feel, so I'm not that concerned about losing track. But I'm pretty sure I'm on number 4. We'll see. As my dough gets thicker and thicker, I like to try and make sure I get the flour incorporated. The first couple of cups don't matter. But when you start getting it where it's thicker, you want to kind of have it incorporated before you add more. I'm going to go ahead and add another whole cup. Because I can tell how wet the dough is, I will definitely knead it. Yeah, I'll definitely knead it with my hands, and I'll definitely need more flour. Now I think it is time to get in with my hands. Now if you have a mixer, you can totally do this in your mixer. I have a KitchenAid that I used to use for small batches of bread, but it is broken. And all I have is my big, huge mixer, which is too big to do this bread. I'm just gonna fold it over and press it in. I'm kneading it as I'm mixing in my flour. Now that I've got that kneaded in, I am going to add more flour, and that was number 5, this is number 6, and I'm just gonna add a little bit at a time of this last cup of flour, just to make sure I don't use too much, because sometimes you may need exactly 6 cups, a little less than 6 cups, or a little more than 6 cups. If you don't want to make this with sourdough, you can use any bread recipe you would like that's more of a soft dough. Okay, I've gotten that flour incorporated. Now I'm going to add a little bit more. I do my kneading in a bowl. I just prefer that than to doing it out on the countertop. But if you would prefer to do it on the countertop, go right ahead. I've gotten that mixed in, and I want to just show you the dough, how it looks. You can see that it's fairly sticky, and so that tells me I need more flour. And I have just about a ½ cup left. I'm going to go ahead and add all that to my bowl because I definitely think this bread will need it. 6 cups was just the right amount of flour for me today. And honestly, typically that's about what's just right for me all the time when I'm making sourdough. But it does vary. You could need a little bit less or a little bit more depending on your environment and how humid it is where you live. My dough is ready. It's all come together nicely. It's not sticky at all. And look at the bounce that it has. You want to see that. You want to see it bouncing back a little bit. And that tells you that you've got just the right amount of flour in there. So now we're going to let this rise until it's doubled in size. This loaf will probably take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. If you did not use any yeast, it may take up to 8 hours to double. It'll all depend on your starter. This recipe can be found on page 11 on my ebook, Easy Sourdough Start to Finish. The dough rose up nicely. I like to use a little Pam on my hands, or a little oil if you don't use Pam. It just helps the dough to not stick to your hands. And I'm going to release all the air out of my dough because we're going to let it do a second rise, a long rise again. And just kind of punch it down. One thing I like to do is weigh my dough. By doing so, your loaves will be even. This should be around 3 pounds, a little more. It's almost 3.5 pounds. And what I do is I make 1 pound loaves usually. And so I will separate my dough and weigh it out and get to 1 pound balls to work up. This was just a little over 3.5 pounds. Stay to the end for some bonus content of what I did with my extra dough. So I'm going to move this out of the way. And I'm going to put a little bit more oil on my hands. I've got my bread pan. I like to use the disposable bread pans. And I have it sprayed also. And we're going to make this first loaf into a regular loaf of bread. It can be for sandwich bread or whatever. And you rock it between your hands and pinch it under. That's going to help it to create a nice dome in your pan. For our second loaf, I'm using the recipe for herb bread found on page 29 of my ebook. What you're going to do is separate your 1 pound of dough into 3 balls. Try and make them as even as possible. I could use my scale to be sure of it, but it really doesn't matter. Now I'm going to roll each one into a small log. And they don't have to be pretty because they're going to rise up and they'll be beautiful. One. Now instead of using herbs, I'm going to use this bagel mix. And it is so good. It has black sesame seeds, white sesame seeds, garlic, and sea salt, and onion. And I'm going to use a bread pan that I have not sprayed with oil, and I'm just going to add some of this to my pan. I'm going to add a good bit to my pan, actually. I'm going to put my dough in here and just roll it around and get it good and coated. And this, oh, it smells so good. Okay, now I have them good and coated. I'm going to pinch the ends together. This is going to be a beautiful, beautiful bread. Now I'm braiding this. And it will impress anybody that sits around your dinner table. It is beautiful. I'm going to roll it over. You see I have not quite as much right there. I'm just going to pick a little bit up, put it on there. Now I have my bread pan that I've already sprayed, and I'm going to set this in my bread pan. You could just do this on a cookie sheet if you wanted to, but I want this to grow up into a loaf. Now for our third loaf, we're going to flatten it out again. Oh, there's one of my seeds. I don't want seeds in this loaf. We're going to roll this out. Cinnamon bread is on page 16 of my ebook, and I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to cut it differently, and it's going to make a beautiful presentation. What's so nice about using this one dough recipe and creating 3 different loaves, you'll have breakfast bread, And you'll also have bread that you can have sandwiches with and bread that you can actually serve with your supper. This is cinnamon and sugar, and it's to make a little bit, you could use 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, and 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. I keep a lot on hand because I make a lot of bread. You're just going to cover this really good with your cinnamon and sugar. And if you like a lot of cinnamon and sugar, you might want to double that cinnamon and sugar recipe that I just gave you. Okay, now we're going to roll this up. Try and keep all of our cinnamon and sugar in there. Kind of put a lot though. All right, we're going to pinch the dough together. Pinch our seam together. Oop, I lost a little bit here on the end. All right, we want that to be good and closed. And we're going to roll it over seam side down. In my ebook, we would bake this loaf just like this, but we're going to do it a little bit different today. If you'd like to get my ebook, watch to the end and you'll get a code where you can get 50% off. And make sure this is cut completely in half. And we're going to pinch our ends together. And we're going to just twist this over. And over again, if you can get another twist over. All right, and here's my pan, already sprayed. And you're gonna very carefully pick this up and lay it in your pan. This bread is as good as the famous Dollywood cinnamon bread. Now we will let these breads rise until they're doubled. This may take 4 hours or it may take 6 hours. All right, the oven is preheated to 350 degrees and I'm gonna go ahead and place my breads in the oven. I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes because these 2 breads may not take quite as long. I'll probably bake my loaf for 30 minutes. This bread turned out so good. I'm very pleased with it. But y'all, I know everybody says this, but it smells even better than it looks. I like to always put a little butter on the tops of my bread. It makes the crust softer. And I'm going to also do butter on my seed bread, but I'm not on my cinnamon bread because I'm going to actually do a little icing on there. You do have to be careful when you're putting the butter on this bread to not pull your little seeds off or herbs. I always like to take my bread right out of the pan right when I finish cooking it because it will sweat on the bottom. So there we go. It is just beautiful. You don't want to get seeds on this bread. One reason I like to use these pans is because, I mean, they are just taken out the oven and they're really hot. So I can't hold it long, but I can hold it long enough to pull it apart and to loosen my bread and then dump it like that. All right, for my glaze or my little icing that I'm gonna put on my top of my cinnamon bread, I have a 1/2 cup of powdered sugar, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of water. And when I said a little bit, I meant a little bit. And you know what I did? I dumped a lot of it. So the way to fix this is to add more powdered sugar. So you see, it's very runny. And honestly, if this was for me, I would leave it that way because I don't like a thick icing. But this is not for me. It's for a friend of mine. So I'm going to make my icing a little thicker. So now I've added an extra 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. And now it's thicker. So I was doing this, I should have poured it in my spoon to add a little bit at a time. And honestly, you probably would only need to start with 1 tablespoon of water, maybe even less than that, to make sure you don't get it too liquefied. Because we want it to stay on top of our bread. What I'm going to do with my bread, because I know this will run down the side some, I'm going to leave this bread in the pan when I put this on there, and I'm going to let it sit for a little while, then I'll take it out of the pan. All of these recipes are in our ebook, Easy Sourdough Start to Finish. You can grab it in the link in the description below. And if you get it today or this month, use the coupon code Doughvember and you will get 50% off. Now on to what I did with the rest of the dough. Bonus content. I have been wanting to try this. I've saved a video on my phone for a long time of making these donuts. And Tommy commented of how good this everything bagel smells. I mean, y'all, it smells amazing. And we're not even baking bread yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm rolling my dough out. This is about half a pound of dough that I had left over. And so I'm rolling it out. And like I said, I've never done this before, but I've wanted to try it. And I'm gonna take my donut cutter. I wanna make donuts one day too. Comment below if you wanna see me make donuts. All right, so you have that. And you can do this with a glass too. It's just I already had this donut cutter. It's not real easy cutting dough like this with it. All right, and then you have to make a knot with it. And let me see. I might have to go watch the video. How do you do it? Let's see. You do this. Okay, I'm gonna go watch the video. So I'm having a hard time figuring this out. Tommy thinks he knows how to do it, that we're really doing it right, but my dough is too sticky. So I'm going with a different plan. So this is what I've come up with so far. This is the thing that I tried to do with the 2 loops of dough, and I just kind of smushed it together because it didn't do right. And these are some knots that I'm doing. I know I can know how to do these. I'm gonna still go ahead and use my donut cutter because it makes it just the right size. And what I've done is I break it in half. If you don't have a donut cutter, you can just roll out little strips of dough like this. And then you take it and you really tie it in a knot. You tighten a knot and then you tuck your ends under like that. So that will be so cute and so pretty. So that's what I'm gonna do with the rest of this dough. I'm gonna put it back together and I'm gonna make us some dough knots. And here is the finished product with our bread knots. And I'm going to put a generous amount of butter on them. Sourdough is so versatile. You can make so many different things with it, like my cinnamon rolls. There's a link in the description below showing you how I do that. Watch that next.